Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You can always tell the Americans because they respond when you say good morning, whether or not anyone actually cares about it. So, we're going to talk about understanding risk in supply chains. And we're going to be talking in particular about software supply chains. But before we get into that, some of you might be wondering, who the heck is this guy? So, I used to be a professor. I wasn't very good at it. And so I got suckered into joining the US government. That's right. I am here from the government of the United States of America. No one is perfect. Whichever parts you don't like, I probably don't like them either. But that's okay because we're trying to do something constructive here. I work for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. How important is security? Security is in the title of the agency twice. Our mission is to understand, manage, and ultimately reduce the risk to our critical infrastructure. So cybersecurity is a big deal. We're here to help it. We are the main cybersecurity agency in the US government. Now, some of you are saying, you know what? I'd really like to go get a coffee. I want to go and visit our excellent sponsors booths out there. So maybe I'll just duck out of this talk, and that's fine. The takeaway, if you decide you want to get a coffee, is the software bill of materials, or SBOM, is a key part of managing our supply chain risk, and it is coming. So almost every organization here needs to know about it and begin preparing about it. And that's what this talk is going to be about. So if you're not interested, just remember SBOM is coming, and then go and grab a coffee. I also want to make a small apology. Usually when I give a talk like this to wonderful people, I like to have lots of pictures and funny jokes and things like that. And last night, as I was trying to plug in my computer to review my slides, it fell on the ground, broke. I blame the excellent Spanish wine that I had last night. So I apologize. This is just going to be small amounts of text. But again, hopefully we can learn together. So we're talking about software. There's a famous quote from perhaps the most famous venture capitalist in the world, Mark Andreessen, close personal friend of mine. No, that's not true. Please don't ask me for an introduction. But he said, software is eating the world. What does that mean? It means that every organization on the planet is now a software company, right? You make power, you're a software company. You provide plumbing, you're a software company. You're a law firm, anyone remember the Panama Papers scandal? You're a software company. So we all kind of know that, that's why we're here. But there's another important thing that we need to think about for software. And that's software is assembled. It is not hewn out of a big block of marble by a tonsured monk on a Greek island. It is assembled. It's like Legos. And each of those building blocks is made up of more building blocks. And underneath that, more building blocks. Very few people write software today. They assemble it from existing pieces. Some of you sell those existing pieces. That's wonderful. Some of it's open source, and I'll talk more about what open source means in a little bit. What are some of the things that we're trying to address here? So I'll give you 3 stories about why SBOM might be useful. Let's start off by talking about devices, about security cameras. Last fall, both the US government and the UK government said, hey, there are some security cameras that we don't trust. They come from manufacturers that we're worried about. And so those cameras should not be on sensitive sites. It's a decision made by 2 governments, more are following. The problem is that many cameras don't actually say who the manufacturer is on the side. They're sold and resold to the point where a researcher in Japan had to develop an artificial intelligence algorithm that could look at a picture of a camera and try to predict who made it, because that's how little visibility that we have in our supply chain. We need to have special things just to tell us who makes a thing. And there are vulnerabilities. Has anyone heard of Log4j? Right? A lot of us in security spent last Christmas vacation hunched over our tiny little travel laptops in my case, it was in my sister-in-law's guest room with a lot of kids' toys around me, figuring out how we were going to address this. Why? Because Log4j is a piece of logging software. It's a Java library. It's made by Apache, which is an open source project. And someone last December found a vulnerability in it that would allow an attacker to execute arbitrary code. For those of you who are not security people, that's bad. That means the attacker can do whatever they want on your network. And the problem is, this is everywhere. It's in IoT devices, it's in industrial devices, it's in software made by the biggest companies in the world, including OT companies, and by some of the smallest projects out there. The other problem is we have no idea where it is, because it's used in software that's used in software that's used in software all the way down. And so tracking this was very tricky. And a lot of us spent our time calling up our provider and saying, is it in your software? Do you have this? Have you patched it yet? Doing cybersecurity by telephone is the wrong way to do cybersecurity. And the last story I want to tell is also about a vulnerability called Ripple 20. This is a vulnerability that appears in a lot of IoT devices. And in particular, it was a vulnerability that was used in a TCP library, a networking library that was used very widely. And again, it's buried deep in the supply chain. The security researcher who found this, a guy named Shlomi, wanted to do the right thing. Before he told the world, hey, there's a vulnerability that could put people at risk, he said, well, I'm going to go and tell the companies that use this software that they might be at risk. Problem is, he had no idea who these companies were. So what he and his team did was they had to go looking on LinkedIn for anyone who was claiming expertise in using this Trek IP library, because it's the sort of thing you want to brag about. And then he had to say, well, where did they work? And then reach out to those companies. Again, that is a very inefficient way to run our global cybersecurity efforts. We need a better way. What's that better way? That better way starts very simply, which is to say, we need more transparency. We need visibility to the right people at the right time to think about software supply chains. What does that transparency look like? It looks like SBOM. So let's unpack that, right? Software bill of materials. What is a bill of materials? Well, almost everyone here, I think, is familiar with the idea of a bill of materials. And bills of materials are useful to a lot of different people. If you make anything tangible, you need to know what all the components are. And so that's the idea of a bill of materials. If you're producing stuff, you can't do it without tracking what are the pieces that go into your thing. But it also applies to the market. If you buy stuff at scale, you're probably going to ask, hey, what's in this thing that I'm going to buy? Because I need to know what the total cost of ownership is. How do I replace all the parts that get worn down? What are those suppliers? Are they popular? There are companies out there that will actually help you understand the supply chain risks of the things you buy. And then, of course, once it's on your network, you need to make sure that you have all the spare parts, that you know what your backup plan is if the company goes out of business, etc. So bill of materials is a pretty common, well understood piece for physical stuff. What we're trying to get to is making sure that we can do this for software. Another analogy is a list of ingredients. If I go to the store and I buy the great American snack, a Twinkie, it will come with a list of ingredients. This is everything that's in a Twinkie. Why do we expect more transparency from a non-biodegradable snack than we expect from what's running in our OT networks, in our critical infrastructure, in our governments and national security systems? Now, pulling that thread for a little bit about a list of ingredients. What does that list of ingredients get you? Will the list of ingredients magically protect your family from something that they have a very serious allergy from? Will that list of ingredients keep me on my new January diet? Will that list of ingredients make me stay on a religious lifestyle diet or a plant-based diet or something like that? The answer to all this is no, right? The list of ingredients by itself won't magically do all of those things. But good luck trying to do any of those without that list of ingredients. Right? That's the power of transparency, is it enables you to think about the risk that you care about. And by the way, this is where I'd like to put up a picture of a list of ingredients for Twinkies. Twinkies are not vegetarian. You'd never know that thinking about it's cake, but they are not vegetarian. And so for many of us don't care, but a lot of us do. That's why you need that ability to sort of customize your risk. So why should we care? And again, we're here to talk about cybersecurity, so we're going to focus on that. But before we get into cybersecurity, one of the things is, this is about quality, right? The idea of tracking what goes into a thing predates cybersecurity. It goes all the way back to the late 1940s and early 1950s, where Deming was helping transform modern industry and the Toyota supply chain revolution. But it is about security as well. One of the obvious ones is just vulnerabilities, right? Anyone have any idea how many vulnerabilities were publicly identified in 2022? Over 34,000 software flaws that had some risk were found 2022. That includes really big, serious ones. It includes things in, Microsoft Windows, but it also includes flaws in OT, in IoT devices, in things that are used in critical infrastructure, and things that are buried in our supply chain. But it's not just these accidental things that bad guys are using. Attackers are now going after our supply chains. Now, part of this is good news. It means that our software, while far from perfect, is getting better. And so a lot of attackers are saying, well, if I want to go after a target, governments or just basic, I want to exploit things, they're going after our supply chain. They're compromising open source projects. They are attacking companies. And for people who say, that doesn't affect me, no one would attack me. One, you're wrong. They will attack you. They're looking for targets of opportunity. But two, has anyone heard of NotPetya? That was a supply chain attack for an organization, a nation state. Russia was going after a Ukrainian software update mechanism for a Ukrainian company. And that ended up taking down some very large and important companies in Europe and around the world. And then, of course, we're now paying a lot more attention to open source. What is open source? Open source is software that is provided for free as is by anyone and everyone. And we use it in our products. We use it in our projects. And we're now starting to say, hey, if this is my supply chain, what do I actually know about it? What's the risk? And there are a lot of software projects that we all depend that have very few people that are actually safeguarding this. So maybe an attacker can trick whoever maintains this, or maybe the person just decides they can do whatever they want. There's a problem that I call the ukulele problem, which basically says a huge chunk of our digital infrastructure is dependent on a very small number of people never deciding that it is more fun to go learn to play the ukulele than it is to maintain an open source project. So we need to make sure that we have visibility into this. And regulation is also coming, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So why should you care? Because the government's going to make you care. So, Allan, you've been talking about SBOM for a while. What the heck's an SBOM? An SBOM is a dependency tree. It says this piece of software uses these pieces of software, which in turn uses these pieces of software. We don't need that much information to sort of track this. Who's the supplier? What's the name of the piece of software? What's the version, right? Is it an up-to-date version or is it an out-of-date version? And then where did this data come from? Did it come from my company? Did it come from my upstream provider? Did it come from a security researcher? How do we know that this data is true? So if this is such a good idea, why don't we already have this? Anyone who wants to know the history, I'm happy to talk about. The short version is we tried. Industry said, no thank you, including lobbyists in Washington, D.C., who really tried to bury this idea forever, to the point where when I started this project, I tried to avoid using the term SBOM because it was so radioactive in Washington, D.C. The other reasons why is because it's actually hard and it requires coordination. We all use the same software, so this isn't a solution that one sector can go off and solve, or that a single government can go off and solve. We actually needed to come together and build it responsibly. And that's exactly what we did. The US government pulled together experts from around the world, from a host of different technology companies, OT companies, medical device manufacturers, professors, people from governments around the world. This really was a very big tent. And we said, how do we define what this is? And now we've got the definitions, we've got the building models, and we can actually do this today, and people are starting. A lot of the big companies that I talk to, if not most of the big ones in the OT world, are starting to develop SBOMs for their products. They're asking their upstream suppliers for SBOMs. There are a host of security companies that can provide the solution for this for you. There are countless startups. 2022, I can probably identify maybe 24 brand new companies that are focusing on some part of this. There are open source projects that will provide this for free. There's a Docker command called SBOM. Docker is a very important part of modern cloud native software. You know what the Docker command SBOM does? It gives you an SBOM of your container. And if you want more accurate or more precise ones, then there are companies that will go and help you do this today. So we absolutely can produce SBOMs, and we're starting to learn how to consume them, how to take that data and go from data to intelligence to action. But I also want to acknowledge that this is not a completely mature technology. One of the things we're working on is integrating this data into our existing data management systems, our existing cybersecurity systems, and making sure that everything can interoperate together. There are some proprietary approaches. What we want to make sure is that we can do that without relying on specialized local solutions. So if anyone wants to get involved in how to mature this, I'll have some information at the end of the talk. So, can you SBOM today? Yes. Are we done with SBOM? No. Should we start? Yes. So who should care? There are three large roles that we should care about. One of them is if you make software, you absolutely need to know what's in your software. One, from a quality perspective, right? If you don't know what you're shipping, you've got a problem. And you may be doing it very inefficiently. But also from a security perspective, when the next Log4j comes along, there's value in just having an SBOM, because then you can quickly say, am I affected by this risk? Buyers need to care. And by the way, this includes producers as well, right? If you go out and you buy software, you select software for your product, you should know what's there. One question to ask yourself is, should I buy from an organization that can't produce an SBOM? The Bank of America, a chunk of it was asking for SBOMs almost 10 years ago. Did they need it to be machine readable the way they are today? No. You could fax them an SBOM. They just knew that if my supplier cannot produce an SBOM, then the total cost of ownership is going to be much higher than from a company that actually knows what's in their supply chain. So you should be asking for SBOMs today. And then once you have software on your network, you need to be able to track that data. Why? Because again, when a new risk emerges, when we say, oh gosh, this is bad, it's got a vulnerability, or it's been compromised, or the secret squirrels tell me that there's some real risk, you need to be able to quickly say, am I affected? And more, you know who's going to be asking you? Your board, right? Software security and cybersecurity is now something that our leadership is asking for. And if you can quickly respond when they say, hey, this vulnerability is on the news, should we care? You need to be able to provide a quick response of yes or no, I got you covered. Now, there's some reasons not to do things. And again, if anyone wants to know more, I can talk about these details. But I do want to acknowledge one. There's going to be some cost at the beginning. If you have a modern software ecosystem, this is going to be a lot cheaper. If you have a good CI/CD development process, this will be cheaper. And then there are some reasons why people think you shouldn't, but you actually can. Will this provide a roadmap to attackers? No, and I'll talk about that. Is this the same thing as sharing my source code? Is this going to be giving up my intellectual property? No. And again, happy to talk more about all of these questions. And the last thing I want to talk about today is to say, don't just think about SBOM because I say you should. Think about SBOM because this is something that is coming for all of us from our friends in the government. Government gonna government. So first, let's talk about across the Atlantic. What's happening in the United States? Who's in the medical device space? Anyone here work with medical devices or healthcare? A couple of you. Pretty soon, to sell a new medical device in the United States, you are going to have an SBOM. And we think this is going to also spread to other regulated sectors. The automotive sector is starting to think about this. The ICS, the energy world, is thinking about this. I just briefed the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're looking at how do we track our supply chain. So regulators are going to be focusing on this. And then the US government is getting involved from a purchasing perspective. Executive Order 14028, which came from President Biden, says everything that the US government buys is going to have an SBOM. And I'll give you guys a little tip. The US government buys a lot of things. And that doesn't just mean enterprise software. That also means operational technology, and it means IoT. It was just announced a very serious flaw in printers that would allow an attacker to compromise and to read everything that a printer has printed. And again, think about your organization. Your organization probably prints some things that you don't want to be public. And of course, here in the EU, the Cyber Resilience Act was officially announced in the fall. It'll be a couple years before it's actually enacted, and it's going to go through a lot of discussion. But one of the things they require is everything that is sold inside the union must have an SBOM, and that SBOM must be shared with your local regulator. So this is coming for a lot of us. All right, let's wrap up. What can you do? One, make sure your organization is familiar with the idea of SBOM. If you want me to come talk, I'll come talk to you. I'll explain more details. We can do a full technical deep dive. Two, start asking for SBOMs. It's one thing to say, I've got to produce an SBOM. That's important. We should start moving down that path. But the easy thing to do today is to ask your suppliers. Ask the folks in your supply chain or the people who are just selling you stuff. Hey, do you have an SBOM? Why don't you have an SBOM? What are you going to knock off the contract that I'm about to sign? What discount are you going to give me until you can give me an SBOM? So start thinking about it, start building a plan to produce them, and start asking for SBOMs. And then, if you really like this idea, get involved. CISA runs global working groups to enhance and refine the idea of SBOM. So if you say, hey, this is interesting and I want to help, I want to shape the future of this, we're not doing this by fiat. We're doing this in a collaborative effort. We've got lots of European companies involved. We've got governments, the Germans, the Dutch, the Japanese. So this really is a global effort. How do we make this a better effort? You can get involved and you can share your expertise. So that's my time. I'll be standing outside if you want to chat, ask questions. We're very excited to make sure that we can have transparency and understand what our risks are. So thank you for your time this morning. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. We can talk more. Thanks.